Welcome, Eagles, to another episode of Tradcat Night Radio. I am Eric Ajewski, founder and owner of Tradcat Night, the most viewed and followed traditional Catholic website worldwide, ranked number one by Alexa in the world within the realms of traditional Catholicism. On the heels of bringing on other geoengineering experts, Dr. Steve Amato, Dane Wigington, to name a few, I bring on another today, and this talk is going to blow your mind, folks, because this is an area that not a lot of people want to talk about. They kind of push it off to the side. They don't want to get into this world because it would totally revolutionize how they think about the things they're seeing, how things are perceived. But nevertheless, I have with me today Alana Freeland, and she is a writer and ghostwriter, lecturer, storyteller, and teacher. She has written and researched all her adult life on alternative issues, including stories of survivors of MK Ultra and ritual abuse. She is now perhaps best known as the writer of Chemtrails, HAARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth, which is the crux of our talk today. It was published in 2014 by Feral House Books. Presently, she is completing the sequel for a resurrected SDI Star Wars space fence topic, which translates to a planetary lockdown utterly dependent upon chemtrails and sky heater technology. Again, this is going to blow you away, the information that she presents today. Undergraduate degree in creative writing, double major in biology, master's of arts degree in great books from St. John's College. She joins us today, I believe, from Washington. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But where do we begin with this topic, Alana? Again, we cover this here at Tradcat Night. I'll kind of tie in what I believe is going to happen here in the not-too-distant future about this phony Christ arising onto the scene that kind of integrates everything you're going to talk about. But, how did you get involved with these topics? Give us a backdrop for the writing of this book, and what essentially were your findings?
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Eric. I began this particular topic years ago, maybe a couple of decades by now, when I was researching the underbelly of the American government. Like many people, after not just 9/11, but I go way back to the murder of John F. Kennedy in Dallas. And so I wanted to know why we were being lied to so much by our government and how it just kept going on and on and on and getting worse. So I spent a good 10 years researching for a set of books that I wrote before I ever hit this topic, and those books are called Sub Rosa America. And they're fictional histories of America since Kennedy's assassination. I had a moment of destiny with the, I believe, only Catholic president we've had. In 1963 summer, I was at Girls Nation. I'd been elected by about 800 girls at Girls State to represent my state. And it was the same summer Bill Clinton was there at Boys Nation. I didn't know him, but he was there. He's referred to it. And I had tea with Kennedy in the Rose Garden with other girls. And Kennedy picked me out of the crowd and said I looked like his wife. It was an overwhelming moment for me. Photographs, sort of my 5 minutes of fame going back to my home state. And when I got back, I, of course, went to the civic groups who had paid for my trip to Washington and gave my talk about my moment with Kennedy. And I had spent the week with Lyndon Baines Johnson. He was the one that oversaw my group. So I had also gotten a foretaste of him and what he was like. He was very creepy. He would say to me every morning, what are you going to show me today, little gal? And that's because I was from Missouri, the show me state. And I now realize that he was not the kind of man that a young girl wants to be around. So I then, when Kennedy was killed 3 months later, I had to go back to those groups and give another talk in rooms full of sobbing people. And I think that's when my political self awakened. I was 16. And the 60s happened, and all through the 60s, we had King's death and Robert Kennedy's death, and it was an overwhelmingly amazing political period. A lot of people present it as nothing but sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but it was far, far more than that. And I was already political. I was always writing for whatever college campus I was going to, because I was traveling around America to see what was going on. And then I did a lot of different things, the Waldorf period, giving courses on mythology and storytelling and Carl Jung. And I've done a lot of things that actually prepared me for what I call the big picture mind. That's the kind of mind I have. I can put things together in a big picture, and I think that's my value to the so-called chemtrails geoengineering movement that we have, which is mostly via internet. Though I do travel to give talks and I meet other activists, it's really a wonderful thing to see these people donating, never getting paid, donating hours and hours of time to study and present what they're finding. Because the truth is, you could not go to one university in the United States that I know of and take a course or a set of courses, get a PhD or a master's in this topic, because every day is breaking news. This is a technology on the edge. And I began to realize that after I wrote Chemtrails, HAARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth, because that book, I pretty much was just gathering evidence of what we knew at that point in 2014. And the publisher had actually asked me to write it. I was on other topics, and I thought, no, I'm going to do this one. And there's no better way to learn about something than to write a book on it. And I have a master's in historiography, so I'm a real ace researcher. And I just plunged in and did the best I could to just record what we knew then. Because since then, in the last 2 years that I've now been writing the sequel on the space fence, which is the next phase of this same technology, completely connected to what is going on, has been going on for almost 2 decades under what's called Project Cloverleaf, I have found that I can almost feel the man behind the curtain. This is a national security technology, so that means that there are no public discussions of it. And of course, we're all made fun of as conspiracy theorists or tinfoil hats. And that goes with the territory. The same sort of thing happened when the Manhattan Project was going on back in the 40s before the nuclear bomb. So that doesn't deter me at all. Name calling is the lowest of the low in my book. So we have found that the man behind the curtain is discovering things at the same rate, maybe even a better rate than mine. And that's how I'm writing it. I know that what I wrote 2 years ago, there's a terrific update in this next book, almost 100 pages to update what I didn't know then and or what has broken since then in the technology. And people probably want to know, how can you know something and write a book on something when you're not right there at the NASA headquarters or NOAA or the FAA? That is the trick of research. It's the same as probably the reason I love detective stories. Sherlock Holmes arrives, the victim is dead, the body is cold, maybe it's not even there, there's no weapon. He's looking around and figuring out what might have happened there. And he has several hypotheses that he then begins to pursue as he turns up evidence that others just sort of neglect or overlook. And it's how it works. It's how you find things out in a national security state, which is what we live in. And I think most Americans don't want to know about this. I think that's a real tragedy, because I think we've lost this country for the Constitution and democracy because people had the wrong idea of their authority figures and the idea that they themselves were just sort of low on the totem pole and couldn't possibly know such technology as is going on now. No one has a plasma physics degree or an astrobiology degree, but that isn't really what we need. We need people who believe in their thinking, who believe that they can actually study something and compare and contrast with other references, and not just sit in front of the boob tube, the TV programmer, I call it, as with no confidence in ourselves as a people. You know, the democracy, the democratic aspect of our republic is really, you have to protect it. And it isn't enough to march in the streets. It isn't enough to just wait for some benign experts to come along and tell you the truth. We have to ourselves oversee that. And I think I learned that back in the 80s when I read a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. And that was where he recounted the amazing, I mean, I was staggered by it. I considered myself a pretty good historian, but I had missed this. And that was when in Illinois, Abraham Lincoln was involved in a series of debates. And during those debates, public debates, people would drive in with their wagons and their horse and buggy, with their family and food packed, and they would come into town 20, 30, 40 miles and then spend the time listening to, he was debating William O. Douglas. They'd listen to the debate, then they'd have a nice little lunch or a supper, and then there'd be a counter debate that night. And during the day, they would mill around and talk with each other about the substance of the debates. This was an era where you were the TV, you were the newscaster, and you had to be really sharp. And these were just farmers. These were merchants. These were not people with a lot of degrees or connected to great organizations. And that's when I realized, yeah, that's what it takes to have and maintain and keep a democratic republic from the power mongers who see the end, that the means will justify the end. And that's how I feel about this, is this has to be known. This is technology. Yes, it is pretty intense when you start studying this stuff, but and you pursue it, and you're willing to admit when you're wrong and just correct your error and move on. You can learn about this, and that's how I write these books. I really am writing for the layman. I was recently interviewed for a magazine article back east, and I think the fellow assumed that I was writing my books for, like, in an academic sense. Well, I think anyone who would look at them, though I did have 600 footnotes in the previous book for people that wanted to pursue things, but I don't write for academics. I'm no academic anymore. I'm writing for the people of this country so that they can prepare their children and their grandchildren for what's coming, because I now see how the powers that be, and that includes the global elites and scientists who have been embedded in the global dream or nightmare of absolute control over humanity, with a return to, in a way, a spiritual feudalism, I suppose I'd call it. We don't have kings anymore, but we certainly have corporations and CEOs and boards who are interested only in their own self-interest and not in the people, just as kings used to be. So I see that this is it's a prophylactic to read these books and understand this technology from someone who herself has gone through the learning curve and has digested everything and attempts to show it so that people can use that information right away to improve their lifestyles, to prepare their children, and prepare themselves for what is true. We have entered a space age, and hardly anyone seems to know it yet.
So we mentioned that key word there, layman. Break it down for us in layman's terms, in terms of chemtrails. You know, we live in this busy world of ours. People will do their 9 to 5, they come home. Hardly anyone is paying attention to the skies. Now, I live out in the Ohio Valley, and I can tell you they are spraying on a near daily basis. And, you know, so break it down for us in terms of chemtrails. Tell us the difference between a contrail and chemtrail. And then lastly, within this particular area, what overall is the grand scheme? Is it just slow kill? Is it overall the mind control aspect, which ties in with HAARP? I have done some research, and I've seen, in conjunction with Project Bluebeam, a phony alien invasion on the horizon, possibly, and also a staging for a false Christ that we kind of talked about off air. Or is it all these things? I mean, is it just... I mean, there's just so many different elements to this. It's not just merely one area.
I know, and an hour is hardly time to just, you could just kind of open the packet.
Yeah.
Trails. The term itself, which is made fun of and scorned, was actually is actually from the U.S. Air Force Academy, 1990. That is the term they used on their Chemistry 101 manuals. It's ironic that the military and military invested media powers would then turn that on its head and use it as a term of scorn for people who do notice what's going on overhead. I became friends when I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with Clifford Carnicom, and Clifford was the first independent scientist who began collecting data on what was falling from the sky. And he did this on a shoestring budget. He's very task-oriented. He made immaculate measurements, and he began to aluminum, barium, and strontium showing up particularly strongly in northern New Mexico from the skies, and they were getting heavily chemmed at that time. But he also noticed that there were polymers in it, plastics, mylar, and he also was able to find, which really stunned him, biologicals were being dropped. And take things down to a micro level to see what they were. He had to find money to buy ever more powerful.
Alana, are you there? You're cutting in and out here a little bit now. Can you hear me? Alana. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for some technical difficulties, as it is with these talks, not only from on my end with Tradcat Night, with Alana herself. Oftentimes these calls are dropped on Skype. So we resume now with Ilana talking about what is actually being found dropping from the skies with these chemtrails.
So in New Mexico, when Clifford was collecting all the data, he and I and his wife and other friends would go out for breakfast, and Clifford and I would end up with our heads together talking on and on about this. And this was before I wrote the Chemtrails book, so I had this backlog. He then collected my blood and my spit and analyzed them, and I was able to look under a microscope and see this genetically engineered biological creature eating the iron out of my red blood cells. And he did a small sampling then. We were looking for people all the time. And all of them had the same thing going on, with some people's red blood cells not even round anymore, but in strange, aberrant phases. So that was a real showstopper for me. All right, I've got a genetically engineered creature in me that's falling from the sky, from these chemical trails being laid by not just military jets at much higher, but by commercial jets. And that's what inspired me to write the book and find out as much as I could about this topic. Now, a chemtrail is very different from a contrail. The truth is that contrails are very rare now. In fact, all the jet engines that I know of that are used by the military and commercial jets and airlines are such that you will not get water vapor at all. You will get a chemical brew that is made either by pyrolysis in the engine, a chemical process that sort of transforms one compound into another, or you will have possibly have an added tank, a pylon that has a tube spewing an additional or supplementary chemical brew for various purposes. And this is not the purposes of the commercial airliners. This is military. And that's really what Project Cloverleaf means. If you read about it, and there's plenty on the web you can read about. Cloverleaf is about getting recruiting airliners to join with the military in disseminating this geoengineering toxic brew, toxic for life forms, toxic for us, for animals, for vegetation, for the soil, for water systems. This is a huge undertaking that they talk about in the future tense in the news. You'll hear about geoengineering and how they're thinking of doing it, how they may have to do it someday, and gee, we don't want to, but we may have to. And that sort of rhetoric of putting things in the future as if it's not going on now and hasn't been going on for 2 decades is basically deceit. So this is not the first time that the American government has used its people for chemical warfare, biological warfare. Not at all. They have dropped chemicals on poor areas of St. Louis a few decades ago. We have Vietnam, of course. We all remember Agent Orange. We've just learned about the Zeta spraying going on, the anti-Zeta spraying going on in Florida, which is absolutely insane, because there's even a doubt that the Zeta mosquito even exists in Florida. So we're being lied to constantly. And one of the great lies is that, oh yeah, these are just contrails, no problem. And meanwhile, you could go to the EPA sites and FAA sites and read about the amazing chemical toxins in the jet fuel for a variety of purposes, all the way from a lubricant to efficiency. But there's more. There's more in those jet engines, and possibly in supplementary pylons for supplementary different agendas. And you mentioned, why would they be doing this? There are a variety of reasons they're doing this. And if I could, I'll just run through basically the 7 that Clifford and I used to talk about. And he's the one who came up with these, and I've sort of modified them as time has gone on. 7 agendas, all military. All of them are military, and we're living in a national security state, and you know what that means. It means that everything goes under wraps. In Congress, in committee, it doesn't matter, in the press, when something is considered national security. So these are secrets. The first one is, obviously, weather modification. Now, the document that came out that made it clear that the military was very invested in having weather engineering and weather control for using as a weapon and weaponizing it was a document very famous called Weather as a Force Multiplier. And that is exactly what has happened. They have been able to do that, and we've been seeing for the last 10 years a variety of experiments going on, from hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, floods. These are all experimental, and I'll explain how they're doing it. But let's go through the others, and I'll just briefly say them. The second one is environmental and geophysical modification. With HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, that ran from the 90s through 2015 and now has been modified. That was to alter the ionosphere, which is a protective envelope that we live in, and it's sort of part and parcel of the magnetosphere. These are protective envelopes that we need in order to be safe from sunspots and solar winds and CMEs. These have all been modified, and I might be more strong in saying not just modified for use here in the lower atmosphere, and as I said, I'll explain that, but they have been damaged as well. Big holes blown in the ionosphere and magnetosphere. So part of what we're seeing in the sky now with the laying of these trails and the endless cloud cover, cirrus cloud cover, which is not moisture-based, it's chemically based, is to keep out the sun, basically. It is solar radiation management, just as they say it is, SRM, but it's more. It's more, because it has to be used for military agendas. So going on to the next one, electromagnetic operations. By continuously drawing down charged particles from the ionosphere, from the upper atmosphere, into our atmosphere, plasma cloud cover is created. And plasma is the 4th state of matter. It's a kind of a cross between gas and fire. And so by constantly creating plasma cloud cover, this has to be done with radio frequency and chemicals. It will not be done by just simply moisture. And so lightning, the Norway spiral that came up a few years ago, the hums and growls that people are hearing from the earth, trumpet sounds as well, all of this has to do with the electromagnetic operation that is really has turned our entire atmosphere into a battery or an antenna. And this is huge for biological health of the planet and us and animals. The 4th operation is military operations. In other words, the weather instrument, the electromagnetic operations, all of this has been weaponized and can be used against various nations, other nations, to force them into compliance, to threaten them. This technology is a weapon beyond belief and is definitely something that we need to know about. Um, the military calls the military operations and all they do for it, they call it it's C4, Command Control, Communications, and Cyber Warfare. And when Dr. Rosalie Bertell was alive, she recently died. She's a famous epidemiologist who specialized in ionizing radiation. She understood the danger we're under very well, and she wrote this in her book, Planet Earth, The Latest Weapon of War, a critical study into the military and the environment. She wrote, quote, the ability of the HARP/Spacelab/rocket combination to deliver very large amounts of energy comparable to a nuclear bomb anywhere on Earth via laser and particle beams is frightening, end of quote. And that's how I see it as well. The fifth operation, biological operations, I already mentioned some of it. I have seen this genetically engineered creature in my blood. And beyond that, we have the GMO foods with Monsanto being very much a player in this whole technology, which, by the way, is a big moneymaker.
Oh, yeah.
And then we now are beginning to see the role of vaccinations. I mean, I just learned this morning that glyphosate has been found in the vaccines. So we have a delivery system with multiple entries to biological life that we need to very much know about so we can help our children and grandchildren prepare themselves for the earth being weaponized against us.
It's unbelievable. I don't mean to cut you off, but yeah, it's really sad, and it just kind of makes your own blood boil. You see this global depopulation program put into place. It's across the board. It's man trying to play God, manipulation of the air, the water, even food supply. You know, it kind of makes you feel like a giant lab rat, and that's why people don't want to poke their head into this rabbit hole in which we're talking about today with Alana Freeland. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Alana. Continue on. I just wanted to make one point. It's kind of interesting to me how the global elite talks about, you know, environmentalism, we need to protect the planet and all this, yet they're the ones that are basically destroying it. And they're trying to
and they did. They co-opted the environmental movement. I mean, one of the, sadly, Greenpeace thinks that the chemtrail movement is a hoot, having done no research into it and not taken anything seriously that should be very seriously taken seriously. And that's how it is. That's how it is. It has been co-opted, and that's how it's worked for many movements, though, really. The medical movement, I mean, it's endless. So, yeah, this is, to me, this is spiritual warfare. We're basically fighting for the life of our planet and the future generations. All right, so then the sixth operation is intelligence and surveillance. And this is where it gets into the space fence, which is what I'm writing about now. The space fence, coupled with the ground-based smart grid and artificial intelligence, means total surveillance of everything and everyone on Earth for the sake of C4, Command, Control, Communications, and Cyber Warfare. And this is where the doctrine of full spectrum dominance has always been going. That's why I used that term in the title of the last book. Full spectrum dominance is a military doctrine, and it means weaponizing everything. And it means that there is no combatant and non-combatant anymore since the war on terror has been introduced. We are all potential combatants to the military. And that's why they need absolute intelligence and surveillance. And when I say surveillance, I'm not just talking about your phone calls and being able to even see you from satellite, since now they can see 2 centimeters worth with LiDAR. No, I'm talking about down to your DNA. I'm talking about absolute surveillance. So they have absolute intelligence on every human being and creature on the earth. And that's the sixth operation, which I know is just unbelievable. And finally, the seventh, which is very interesting to me, and I'm very cautious with it, because the seventh operation is detection and obscuration of exotic propulsion systems. So when we're looking up at this cloud cover, which I'm right now looking up at the Pacific Northwest, sometimes we're able to see that behind that cloud cover is some sort of there are straight lines. It's one of the first things we notice. Triangular shapes. What is up there? What is behind these plasma clouds? Some of which can produce their own plasma cloud, and that has been documented in YouTubes. So as I told you, we're living in a space age, and we can't close our minds to the possibility that our atmosphere is, because it's now ionized, and it's like an antenna, it's electrical, it may be used for ships, national security ships, like the Aurora or the X-37B, that are hiding themselves and perhaps experimenting with camouflage. But it could just as well be other dimensions that are now leaking through, if you will. If we're going to go with quantum physics, we're going to have to say that there are multiple parallel dimensions. And believe in God and believe in all sorts of things, but when you get to this and saying there might be parallel dimensions in which there are entities or beings that have their own technology and their own intelligence, then people back off. I think part of that has to be that we've all been programmed.
You're cutting out a little bit again, Alana.
Oh, I am?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay. It might be that we've been programmed to think of, oh, that's entertaining, or oh, that's a tinfoil hat thing. But we're living in a space age now, and we need to think big, just as our military is thinking very big. I would guess that their technology is 50 to 100 years ahead of anything we know about in the public, which makes it very exciting to enter into this technology and begin to read about it and begin to put the pieces together so that you can understand the time you live in. I can't imagine a greater privilege than to be born into this world and to dedicate yourself to really knowing the time you live in and what it is, whether it hurts or it's shocking or it's scary. It doesn't matter. We really need to take hold of it with our consciousness. We are consciousness beings, and use the gifts that were given to us at birth to thoroughly understand where and when we are living. That really is my credo. And why I work hard with my particular gifts. You know, I don't have a lot of gifts, but I have a couple. And I use those, and I give myself to those. If I could, just for a moment, you know, I went to your site. I was had a little trepidation.
Sure.
And I noticed that you had an article or something on Father Malachi Martin.
Yeah.
Well, Father Malachi Martin, I read his novel, Windswept House, 25 years ago or so. I think he was even still alive when I read it. And I was blown out of the water. It was the best book I had read on Vatican politics I had ever imagined. It was the best. And I noticed that at your site, he was talking about there was a YouTube, he's talking about the The Third Secret of Fatima.
Yeah.
And what he said, really, yes, and I trust that man. That man told the truth. He said that a big factor, we have to watch for a big factor of what is happening in our skies. And then he said, keep your eyes on the skies. And I thought, yes. And we do, and this would be a good place to talk about the false avatar, because with the Project Bluebeam and beyond Project Bluebeam, where you could create a holograph in the sky, or a holograph, I remember seeing a little clip of in China of an entire city.
Yeah.
That was a holograph, right? Yeah. Floating just above the water.
Yeah, they're doing it with crosses in the sky. The Blessed Virgin Mary, even. There was a false apparition down in Africa. So, yeah, the New World Order can use this for anything.
They can, and that's why we have to be particularly conservative about what we're seeing in the sky and bring in the technology and the science. This is our real nemesis in America. People here are the most practical people. They're very pragmatic. They're good doers. They're great in an emergency, but they do not seem to want to think very much along the lines of really studying. Turn the TV off and get the books out and read a couple of paragraphs a night and really think about it. You know, that's how I recommend people to read my books. Some people say, oh, but there's 600 footnotes. Oh my gosh. I say, you don't have to read the footnotes. Just read a couple paragraphs a night and get it under your belt, because, you know, as the Russians say, mornings are wiser than evenings. So whatever happens at night while we're sleeping, it goes over that. But if we're just watching the TV, what will our mind be working on while we're sleeping?
Yeah, total brainwash. I mean, we advocate in the traditional Catholic community, if you can, to try to just stay away from TVs as much as possible. You know, I know that sounds kind of harsh, but it is a brainwashing tool that the elite do use. I totally agree with you. I mean, this is just amazing. We really could talk for hours and hours. Goodness gracious, you know, with HAARP, maybe we could just step aside and work on that a little bit. Maybe explain in layman's terms HAARP to everyone, and then maybe its role working with the chemtrails. You talk about basically we're in just a giant incubator, if you will. You know, certain warming that we're seeing right now can be attributed to essentially these two working together. And maybe also cell phone towers. You know how there's certain ones being constructed now that, from my perspective, it seems to tie into this kind of staging of this false Christ coming, where it's going to be said that he's telepathically speaking to us, and it gets really strange. I've covered this extensively, but some people just don't want to go into this area.
All right, so I'll talk about HAARP, but to tell you the truth, HAARP, since it was shut down in 2015, it's been restarted under the University of Alaska Fairbanks now, and it is still being utilized, but it has been modified. The experiments that the military wanted to pursue with HAARP were highly successful. And what they did is they were able to draw, they had a lot of juice in that. It's a phased array antenna up in Gakona, Alaska, and it has several acres of these antennas, and they would be able to focus it and steer it up to a portion of the ionosphere and then bubble it out, like heat it so much. What the ionosphere has in it is just a lot of ions, a lot of electrons that are popped off of atoms, and they were able to make even more of those. And then they would flood down along the magnetic lines of force in our magnetosphere, and they would come back down to the Earth, and they would come into the lower atmosphere. This was always what the Strategic Defense Initiative under Reagan, Bush, and Cheney, what it lacked. They wanted a Star Wars defense system. They wanted a shield, is the way they sold it to the public. But they eventually had to put it aside. They renamed it the Ballistic Missile Initiative under Clinton, and then it was sort of tabled until Bernard Eastlund, the inventor of HAARP, came out with his patents. And in 1987, they began working on HAARP so that they already had ionospheric heaters, but they didn't have nearly that kind of power that they built into the HAARP. And so when they were able to, for, well, how many years is that? 15, 15, 20 years, 20 years, they had HAARP running. And they were able to keep recalibrating it and kind of tweaking it this way and that as they were drawing that energy from the ionosphere down into the lower atmosphere, which to their satisfaction had never really been done. And they studied all sorts of things while that was going on. And they made some errors and they ran some experiments. They were able to really juice up the hurricanes, such as the one that hit Haiti. That was a HAARP done one. The New Orleans one, Katrina, that was HAARP. Sandy off of the New York and New Jersey harbors, that was HAARP. They used it extensively in order to begin to learn to wield this weather weapon. And the disinformation folks at the media has been owned by the CIA since the 60s, as far as I know, under Operation Paperclip. They, of course, covered it over with this, that, and the other, and now we have the carbons credits, which is not the cause of this warming at all. You see what I mean? Ionospheric heater. They are warming the atmosphere with their weapon, and they have to ameliorate it in some way, so they are pursuing that. That's HAARP. Now, the way they move weather systems here, now that we have, everything's electrical down here. So you want to move a weather system. Let's say you want to move some weather off of the Pacific coast. There's a moisture weather system coming in from the South Pacific. So we've got the Navy ships 200 miles offshore in the West Coast. And the Navy ships can produce now amazing ship trails. So they're adding to it, and they have chemicals in theirs as well. And now, then from above, you have the jets laying chemtrails, and then you have this little envelope, this little sandwich thing that happens there. And now they can move it by a Starfire laser system along in the west. They can also move it by using NEXRADs, which are on almost every radio station in the country, and move it north up to the jet stream parked over Vancouver Island. Throw all that moisture up there. Don't let California have any of it, because California is a long-running experiment in drought and water control. And then they move that jet stream weather system east, south and east, and they create weather systems, tornadoes in Kansas, floods in Arkansas, whatever it is, whatever the agenda of the day is for experimenting with controlling and moving weather systems. And I remember years ago, maybe 5 years ago, Iran complaining that the drought they had there, and they had a considerable drought, and this summer they had temperatures over 126 degrees. Tell me this is not being used as a weapon. It is. It's a done deal, and it has been for 2 decades. However, they've had to tweak it and work out the kinks, because now it's going to be merged. Now it is being merged with the space fence, and that's a topic for a whole other day.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. Yeah, this is a rabbit hole, like I said, that most people don't want to go down. But it's this is interesting stuff, but it's important stuff. People have to know the world around them. And that was actually going to tie in with my next question. A lot of people say, okay, we know all this stuff, Alana, at a certain point, but how do we protect against it? Against all these factors, all these poisons, toxins. Obviously awareness and education is, the primary thing we need to know and understand that. But how do we protect our immune systems? What's the practical advice in terms of getting away from Wi-Fi and TV and computers? I mean, what are some of the things that individuals can practically do to protect themselves, to protect their mind? I mean, do we need to put tinfoil hats on? Lead helmets?
I don't think they'd work. But yeah, you have to examine your lifestyle. I mean, this is where the spiritual really comes in very strongly, I feel. It isn't enough, is it, to convince the mind with intellect, to convince the mind that, yeah, this is dangerous. This is something that I could be paying heavily for. I'm living in a Wi-Fi environment, and I'm not unplugging my router at night. Very foolish. Should always unplug the router if you insist on living with Wi-Fi. You can always turn the TV off because it is nothing but programming. It's given this nation to the guys doing this in the sky, basically. And I've never owned a TV myself. Those two things: don't put a phone up to your head ever. It's a transmitter. It may be tiny, but it is powerful, and it spells cancer within 10 years.
Wow.
Educate yourself on the technology. Have the confidence that you can understand this. At the same time, look at your diet. What are you eating? Are you going to doctors all the time and feeding the medical establishment? Are you taking over-the-counter drugs? Are you taking pharmaceuticals for your moods? Get off them. Find another way.
Yeah.
And, is this paranoia? Well, I've learned to see paranoia as a sixth sense for me. Because you can imagine, I mean, like, falling off the air on these Skype things, and then my phone going dead, and phone interviews. And sure, I'm on a watch list, at least one, probably more. Accept it. We're living in a national security state. What do you expect? You're gonna inquire. You're gonna go on a list. But do I want to live a safe life or an honest life? Well, I know what my choice is. I feel that I will answer for everything I've done here, and I want to make sure that I answer well. So I have self-discipline. I have learned to command myself, except I ate a whole small bag of potato chips the other day.
Uh-oh.
So eat healthy. And Clifford and I agreed. He did several experiments with the Morgellons, which is what it's called, this little cross-domain bacteria, genetically engineered. It hates alkalinity. It loves acidity. Get some pH paper and check your body. Are you running acid? Maybe you need to run alkaline and study how to do that.
Yeah.
Change your lifestyle. And, this is the time we chose to be in. Americans like it where, well, I want to end this today. Well, that's not going to happen, nor will it end tomorrow. Could it be we're heading for a cataclysm? Could very well be a big boo-boo. But do I think that they want to kill all of us? No. No, we're too useful as lab rats.
Yeah.
So I eat alkaline. I also don't eat much meat because that produces acidity. I don't eat sugar, acidity. I don't eat, in the summer I eat some vinegar, but in the winter I eat a winter diet that maintains my body heat and my health and my intestinal fortitude. So, figure it out and look at it as a growth curve, a learning curve of figuring out how to live in a space age under a national security state. This could have been a very different space age, but this is the war that they've set before us, and that's the way it is.
Unbelievable. What a great talk today with Alana Freeland. I am going to put in the description box for you a direct link to her book via Amazon, so you can pick up this book today and read it. Like she said, you don't have to get through half of the book in one night. Get through a couple of pages a night. Actually tap into your critical thinking skills, which so many, and I agree with Alana, here in the West, we've been dumbified. We're dumbed down. And we've got to get control of ourselves. We're not going to change the world until we change ourselves, folks. And that's why I bring guests like Alana on. I'm going to allow her the last few minutes here in closing to provide any other, articles maybe we haven't talked about, social media sites. Do some shameless self-promotion, however you want to close it out the last last few minutes, and then I'll just close us out.
Well, there are a lot of people that I could promote. I have been so impressed with the caliber of truth seekers in this movement. I don't normally join movements, but I somehow have ended up in this one, and I find some people to just be remarkable in their integrity and their hard work and their deep love for humanity and the earth. So for me, go to the only thing, I don't have time to do a website yet, maybe someday, but I do have two Facebook sites, and they're closed sites. I have an Ilana Freeland, that's an open one. And then I have a closed one called Ilana Freeland, Chemtrails, HAARP, and the Full Spectrum. And you have to ask for permission. And what I'll do is I'll go to your Facebook site and see what you're into, and then decide. And the other one is Ilana Freeland, Sub Rosa America, which is about everything else that I'm interested in. So at the Chemtrails HAARP site, there are many articles. Have lots of good members who are posting all sorts of stuff. I mean, I'm writing the Space Fence book. I don't have time to go looking for much else. And you will learn a lot from that site just by reading the articles that are posted there. Very responsible people are members. And some are ex-NASA scientists who have, just given up on the profession and are now fighting for the planet.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you coming on, Ilana. Maybe next time, down the road, maybe we can get a little bit more into, as a follow-up, we'll get into Star Wars Space Fence, but then also maybe a little bit of MK Ultra, mind control. I have brought on certain guests in terms of satanic ritual abuse or just ritual abuse in general. Jay Parker, Fiona Barnett, to name a few. But maybe we could get into that topic a little bit. That's also another interesting topic we'd like to cover here. So, wow, folks. I mean, a lot to chew on today. Get to her Facebook. Again, order her book, Ilana Freeland. We appreciate your time. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe and God bless.